It's the Fulhamish podcast, your independent voice of Fulham FC. And what a dreadful afternoon that was at the Vitality. It seemed to start so well. We came flying out the blocks, 1-0 up after Andreas Pereira's well taken, beautifully crafted goal. And then just the wheels fell off. You know, we let them back in, got a worldie, Solanke with a 79th minute winner. We're wondering what the hell happened. Bournemouth deserved victory. We left tearing up our tickets in disappointment. And yeah, I just, it's one of those podcasts that, you know, I was like, oh God, I've got to do the pod now. Got to talk about that performance all over again. But, you know, there's a bit of group therapy in that. You know, we're trying to unpick it. We're trying to understand it. So I'm delighted to say that I'm joined by Dan Cooke. How you doing, mate?
Coping, Coops. I'm coping.
Yeah, we'll get through it. We'll get through it. Alex Irons, you all right, mate?
Hey, I'm good, thank you.
I'm delighted. Beamed in from Canada. Ben Jarman, how you doing?
Hello, Coops. I'm good, thanks, mate. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. I'm getting over it. But yeah, yesterday and Bournemouth. It's a long old drive to the coming back. It felt a hell of a lot longer than going there, you know. But anyway, let's try and work out what the hell happened. Dan Cooke, have you got some 3-word reviews for us, please?
I do. I think Bournemouth on April Fool's Day means there's just so many puns out there. So there was quite a few good ones out there today. I mean, the ever reliable Richard Solbamba with April Fool's play, which, you know, I think sums up that second half quite nicely. We had our very own Jack Kelly and also Fulham 1000 with On the Beach. We had Fulham Catalunya with Mint Means Defeat, because that mint kit is starting to do my Swede in, because it's both horrific and also we always lose in it. Mark Hopping with the slightly sad European dream over, but followed up by James Wilson with Still Above Chelsea. So, you know,
every cloud.
Positives and negatives. Exactly. And finally, Chris Fank, Cottage Analytica with Cherries on top.
Very good. Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity for pun with, as you said, with the date and obviously Cherries. Yeah, can we just bin off that mint kit? It is just revolting. It's repugnant. Who thought that was a good design? I want to speak to the members of that group at Adidas who put that kit together.
Our black kit is great as well. That black kit I think is fire. I really like that black kit from last season. That's our third kit. It's really nice.
We could have just worn white.
Yeah, like what? Yeah. Hang on a minute. I haven't thought. Yeah, we could have. Why didn't we?
Yeah, we should have just worn all white.
Yeah, mad. Anyway, Ben, it all started so well. You watched the game live from Canada on a rickety old stream, 7:00 in the morning. Feel sorry for you, lad.
Don't expose me, mate.
Where did it all go wrong for Fulham?
Well, I actually thought like first half was pretty good. We were ticking along quite nicely, and then second half it was just absolutely abhorrent at times. We were really, really bad. Me and Dan have spoken about this a few times on the whiteboard recently. Is that we're just really lacking any sort of attacking impetus and structure at the moment. We are very telegraphed in the way we play, and without Alexander Mitrovic up front, we are really lacking a threat to make the ball stick. And I think that our lack of squad depth is really starting to catch up with us now. I think, you know, we have 4 midfielders essentially, and after that is a complete drop off, and you can't expect to play a full Premier League season with just 4 midfielders. And then Bournemouth, I mean, they came out the second half and just completely changed everything they were doing. They targeted the middle of the pitch. They took a war single-handedly to Joao Palhinha, and like, no way he's going to win against the midfield 3 on his own, because Reedy and Pereira were just on the periphery for that second half. And that was the turning point for me.
Yeah, Bournemouth certainly came out of the blocks in that second half. It was a completely different team. But what really disappointed me is that we just didn't seem to match that in any way. There was no intensity. There was no seemingly any game plan. Alex, do you think that lack of fight in the second half is slightly concerning? Especially there's been accusations saying, you know, now with the FA Cup out of the way, seemingly out of the Europe shout, were we a little bit on the beach at the moment, do you think?
No, I don't think so. I think the fact that the Premier League is so close at the moment that, you know, if we had, you know, picked up some points from somewhere in the next couple of games, then we'll be right back in it again. It's the fact that Marcus Tavernier, who's been such a big player for Bournemouth this season, came back from injury. They introduced him into the second half and he changed the game for Bournemouth, really. I think that going forwards, I think into next season, we're going to have to look at, bringing in reinforcements. Our defence has been fragile all season. The fact that we only brought in one defender, I thought, during the entirety of the season was poor from Silver's choice. And I think that to really kind of give the next season a proper go, we're going to have to bring in a lot of reinforcements just across the board.
Just one thing, Coops, on intensity, is that you also I don't think you necessarily need to match intensity with more intensity. I think we could have been calm. We could have tried to deal with this first 15 minutes that, Bournemouth were going to come out of the blocks because the fans were on top of them in the first half. They're scrapping for their lives. They were going to come out quick and just slow the game down, retain possession a little bit. Be calm. You don't necessarily need to go at 100 miles an hour along with the opposition. Just slow the game down, take that bite out of it. And I think that's probably what has really angered Marco Silva, is that we didn't show that game management, which actually under Marco Silva in general has been pretty good. Last season in the Championship, I thought we managed games really well, and we have done this season as well. We're quite good in general when we go in the lead, because we sort of managed to let the game sort of taper at quite a slow pace as it gets towards the end, but we just let Bournemouth swarm us and we just couldn't stop it.
Yeah, no, I get where you're coming from. I mean, you mentioned when we were talking earlier about you're concerned at our issues going forward and our inability to create chances. I mean, the first goal was a beautifully well-worked goal. I say the ball that Vinicius put through to Solomon was exquisite. Cut back to Harrison Reed, laid it off to Andreas. Wonderful team goal. However, you've highlighted some issues about creating attacking chances when we need to get back into the game effectively.
Yeah, I mean, it was one of the hallmarks of Marco Silva's Championship side, and me and Ben spoke about this a lot last season, was this cutbacks FC, as we called ourselves, creating these chances that come from out wide but close to the box or just inside the area, where you can actually pick out a pass. A winger gets their head up and has a man to aim for. And that was brilliant. Lovely move. It was very reminiscent of how, we played at our best last season and also this season. But then from there, we just never did it again. Like, we never exploited those spaces. And it just resorted to Anthony Robinson and Kenny Tete, for the most part, just hurling crosses into the box at Carlos Vinicius, who wasn't really capable. Some of the crosses were poor, and then some of them he just wasn't capable of doing anything with. And at times as well, only one person to aim for. I was pulling my hair out by the 85th minute. I think Anthony Robinson swung a ball in. The only person in the box was Carlos Vinicius, and they had 4 defenders in there. It still seemed to lack that level of creativity at the moment. It just seems so predictable.
If I'm going to be really harsh, I think on Silva, is that we noticed this at times last season, that the Fulham really started to plateau. And it feels really harsh to say this because we were top of the league for the most part. But there was an area just again after Christmas, and then again, I think when we were about to win the title, was that we looked really one-dimensional. We really struggled to get results there, and especially against like a low block. And I think we're seeing it again at this point in the season. And we're at a point now where we don't want the season to fizzle out and become essentially nothing, like a cruise into the end. We had a couple of 3-word reviews already saying that we're on the beach. But what we don't want to do is this, season which has been historic in so many ways, just petering out into nothingness at the end. And we really need a spark here. And it's up to Marco to sort of find that. I mean, I'm in absolutely no way calling for any sort of change whatsoever. I feel like he's done more for our club in the past 2 years than anyone bar Hodgson. So I think he's nailed on to almost like being a Hall of Fame, but he needs to find something from somewhere pretty quickly.
Where do you think that's going to come from, Ben?
Well,
I think it could come from.
Well, I think there's definitely changes that we can make. I mean, Andreas Pereira is kind of reverting back to what the stats indicate that he would be output-wise in terms of how often he's being involved in the game, how influential he is on the team. I think that we could probably do some with a change there, looking at maybe someone like Tom Kearney to come in for this next run of games against teams that are in the bottom half of the league and fighting for their lives. What we're going to need there, we're going to need someone to hold the ball and create those chances. We might look to potentially change some wingers. Me and Dan have spoken about Bobby Decordova-Reid potentially coming out and someone with a little bit more flair coming into that right side. And you might want to change it up at fullback as well. I think, I love Kenny Tete, but he's defensively so sound, but his attacking output is maybe not as high as you might see from someone like Cedric. But it all just depends on getting that balance right. And I feel like we are a little one-dimensional at times right now. And, to save this season, as I said, petering out, we kind of need to give it a little bit of a spark.
Just one other thing, just on that, Coops, in terms of, we spoke about it after Brighton, which was a failed test, which was playing with a striker who is not a target man, playing Bobby Decord over Reed up top. And I wonder, if there is something in there that we sort of just force something different to happen. Because at the moment, I think having a target man up top, it feels so easy to push the ball out wide, put a cross in, because that's how you play with a target man. And maybe adding an extra person in that build-up phase who actually is creative, is good in possession of the ball. I would say Bobby Decord over Reed is much more sound in possession of the ball than Carlos Vinicius is. Just add an extra pass or two in there. Maybe that does help us break teams apart a little bit better, because at the moment I think we are just relying on someone who's over 6 foot winning a header.
Yeah, it does feel predictable, and then teams have your number, right? They know where you're going to play and they can set up to defend it. Just on Vinicius, obviously I mentioned the ball that he put through to Solomon in the build-up, but Alex, apart from that, he felt pretty anonymous, especially in the second half. Do you not think?
I feels like that with him in most of his appearances, which is quite sad to say. He's a player that when he came in, we were thinking, okay, he's not really got that same pedigree that we've seen with Mitrovic, and it kind of nearly felt like an upgraded version of Rodrigo Muniz, who's now at Middlesbrough. And you would have thought, well, why don't we just keep him and not have Carlos Vinicius? But he's a good player on the ground, and he's keeping the ball on the ground, and he's great at putting passes into to the wing. But apart from that, he doesn't really add anything. He's more of a target man in regards to. Or not a target man, he's more of a false nine. Like you'll have him kind of sat on the 30 yard and just ping the ball over to the wings. But really, you want someone in there who can do that and finish. And Carlos Vinicius just isn't that person for us.
I want to come on to a few other sort of individual performances. I thought our fullbacks going forward, the final ball, the crossing was just completely wayward. And Anthony Robinson, just on the second goal, am I right in thinking, what the hell is he doing? Why doesn't he just welly that into Rosette? Dan, I couldn't quite understand. Was it a communication mishap? What do you think happened there?
Yeah, I don't know. I've watched it a few times, and I think there's potentially two things, but neither of them really make much sense to me, which is one, maybe he sees, I think Ream starts to stick out a leg, and I think he also is looking at Leno potentially stretching, and he pulls out, but rule number one of defending on your goal line, don't shirk out of something like that because you think someone else is going for it. If it's there, go for it, clear it. And two, I don't know if there's like a weird thing where I think he sees Dom Solanke coming through, and there is the worry in the box, when a ball sort of is loose and a defender swings a leg, and then someone goes down in a heap because they get their toe on it first. But again, I don't think that applies in this situation, because if he gets a toe on it, it goes in the goal. So I don't really, I think it's just that one tiny moment of indecision that you just can't. It's really weird because I don't think you see defenders do that on their own goal line. Like, I sort of understand it maybe if it's on the edge of the box or just inside the box, but on your own goal line is bizarre. It is a really weird decision because he swings. He does go to swing and then just sort of stops. And then it's too late. Like, it gives Dom Solanke that chance. It's also not Dom Solanke's goal. That's very much known goal. Don't know why he's getting away with this.
Yeah, I thought it very much looked like an own goal. Jarms, obviously we were without two key players who were suspended in William and Mitro. Do you think the Bournemouth result yesterday was a bit of a case of we were without these two key players that can kind of explain the performance, or do you think the issues run a little bit deeper than that?
I think there's an element of that for sure. Definitely looking at the case of Alexander Mitrovic and against the quality of Carlos Vinicius, it is night and day. They are not comparable in terms of their output and quality. Look at the game yesterday. So many times we were just begging out for that ball to be stuck up to a centre forward that can keep it and link the play, bring others into play, the Andreas Pereiras of this world and the wingers of this world, so we can get in behind and counter. Because second half, that was probably what we were going to do to get a result, but we just didn't have the capabilities for that whatsoever. I think when you look at Willian, we have wingers out there that have, similar qualities to him. Manor Solomon is probably a little bit quicker over the first 5 yards and equally as good in those tight spaces. So I think, the absence of Willian was definitely felt, but probably minimised by the output of Solomon. I think, the issues, as you say, likely run deeper. I think, the fullbacks yesterday were nowhere near as good. They weren't probing anywhere near as hard, and they weren't getting in behind to create high value chances. I think, as we spoke about in the upfront section of this podcast, the midfield depth is really, really small. And, too often there was players that end up on the periphery of the game, which is a disappointment considering how good Harrison Reed was in the first half. He was absolutely everywhere, covering all blades of grass. Yeah. He was getting beyond Pereira at times. For him to pop up in the box instead of your number 10 is probably a bit of a question, but a nice setup nonetheless for the goal. And it wasn't until Tom Cairney came on that there was any sort of physicality. And you don't often get that from Tom, but I loved that cameo that he had the last 10, 15 minutes. He crunched Ryan Christie twice, and anyone that didn't like that probably is not a football fan. But yeah, I love Tom, and I think he's reinvigorated himself a number of times over his Fulham career, and I think he's on the path to doing it again. And I think he has to be a big focal point in these next few games, because I think Andreas Pereira definitely needs a rest.
Who'd have thought it? Hard tackling Tom Cairney. If you'd have said that 3 seasons ago, you'd be like, what are you talking about? I want to talk about the officiating, because whilst I don't think the ref had a particularly bad game, I felt that he was incredibly lenient in letting Bournemouth manage the game in terms of time wasting. There was this weird little seemingly rehearsed routine between the ball boy and a fan, and it's just counting down the clock and just seemingly penalizing us for very soft tackles, and then also just I feel like once you allow a bit of time wasting without an immediate booking, it just gets worse and worse and worse. Alex, did you get that frustration, or was that just us sat in the away end losing our minds as the clock slowly ticks down?
It might have been just you guys in the away end. From where I was sat, annoyingly I was working during the game and having one eye on one game and one eye on the 12 faders I had to run at the same time, making sure that everything was going on there as it should be. So I didn't notice it as much as maybe people in the away fans were sitting, but I feel like that's just generally a way that the games are kind of run in general. Like if a team goes ahead, they want one goal up with 5 minutes to go, they're going to run down the clock. That's just the way that it is. And although the idea of a fan and the ball boy having practiced a routine together, the idea of that just seems a bit silly. But
I'm telling you, it happens.
It's honestly, I can regale this story perfectly, because it was genius.
Did it happen in front of you?
It was like the audacity of it. You're like, fucking hell, lads.
Ball went into the crowd. Person in the crowd holds onto the ball. Ball boy reluctantly steps up with his ball that he's got spare, hands it to Neto, and as he hands it and Neto goes off to take the goal kick, the fan then throws his ball onto the pitch.
Oh, I see what you mean. I thought you meant they were like throwing it back and forth between one another, which would have been even
may
funny.
As well have been. It was
choreographed.
But that happens at more or less at every single game. Like I don't think there's anything you can do to stop that, especially when a team are at home and they're up by a goal. The fans are going to do whatever they can to slow things down.
And my point was that the ref let it slide, let the time wasting slide, just did a very passive wave on rather than if you immediately get the yellow card out for time wasting, then nobody else does it.
But he can't book Neto for that.
No. But there were occasions where the keeper took over 10 seconds to take the goal kick, for example. There was a lot of time wasting. Anyway, as I said, I'm not taking anything away from Bournemouth. I think that they were by far the better side and thoroughly, I'm pained to admit it, but deserved the win. Absolutely. They go up to 15th place now. They're out of the relegation zone. I mean, Dan, do you think they got enough to stay up? It was a very spirited performance, especially second half yesterday. I think they potentially could.
I think they've probably got the players to stay up. I don't think they've got the manager to stay up. I know Gary O'Neill's been getting plaudits for the change he made at half time, but it felt a little bit more like a Hail Mary to me than it was a real tactical switch. He just went in to bring on more attacking players because they were 1-0 down, and it worked, and they were more intense. But, you see the Bournemouth players speaking after the game about how did Gary O'Neill change that game. Apparently he just said to them that they needed more intensity. Well, great. That's, I could have told them that because they were woeful in the first half. So I think they've got some good individual players in there. I really like Philip Billing. I like that midfield trio they've got. Senesi was good at the back. Dominic Solanke is, whilst not a natural finisher, a really useful striker to have, especially if you're trying to get, hassle teams and also get in behind. I just don't know if they've got a good enough manager to see them through to stay up. And it's a shame because actually I was speaking about this with a friend who's a Bournemouth fan. I would like them to stay up. We now no longer have any beef with them. Scott Parker's gone. We all hate Scott Parker. Great. But also I think it would be quite a nice story for them to stay up because they started the season with no investment because they were going through a takeover. And so they didn't sign anyone really of note other than probably Marcus Tavernier in the summer. And then they got that additional investment in January that they needed. And it would be quite a nice story if they stay up because they, I think, have a similar air to them as ourselves. I think they're a likeable club. But unfortunately, I think they probably are one of the three that will go down.
Just to top up on Solanke, I thought yesterday he had a great game in the second half. I mean, the amount of times we've seen it, in Fulham Bournemouth games, it's him versus Tim Ream. They seem to put him on Tim Ream every single time. I mean, the first half they did try and put him on Diop, and he was completely shut down. But second half down the channels, that was one of the biggest reasons why they beat us as well. Is him and Ream 1-on-1 down the channels with no fullback support from our side. So yeah, I think he's annoying to play against. One of those physical strikers. Yeah.
Yeah. First goal since November yesterday.
No, it's not because he didn't score. He's not having that goal.
Oh dear. I mean, it was a disappointing result yesterday, but I think you have to contextualize everything in terms of like the bigger picture of the season. And we haven't had many results like that where we were just completely outperformed. I'm thinking Newcastle at home, Newcastle away. Other than that, we've been very fortunate is what I'm trying to say. But do you feel, Dan, as if that result all but ends any talk of ending up in the European slots?
It does. I think it does. And I think potentially on a momentum level as well. I think that'll have stung. And ultimately, I just think the teams above us are better than us. Like it hurts to say it when you were speaking about Brentford, but I think Brentford are currently a better team than we are. Brighton absolutely are a better team than we are. And then you're talking about, traditional top six, big six clubs plus Newcastle. And I just don't think we have the vitamins to get us through the rest of the season. And maybe if we'd have been doing it next season, if we were in exactly the same position come January, I think with additional squad depth, we probably would still be in the discussion. But to have got through to this stage, and I wrote an article for Fulhamish over the international break, we've got probably 14 first 11 players, like in terms of the squad, and then everything around that is just a rotational sub option. But we've only got 14 players who ever put their hand up for a starting slot, and so I think that's really impressive to be where we are, because I don't think anyone else has that level of absolute non-existent squad depth. So, there's a credit in there as well, but I just don't think we have the legs, because April's a big month as well. We've got a lot of games, and I don't know if we'll be able to drag ourselves through this, getting the results we need. Realistically, we'd need to win our next 3 on the bounce, and that's going to be tough.
We have so many players that you would class as like in-betweenies as well. Those that just kind of like are too good for the Championship, maybe not good enough for the Premier League. Like
Harry Wilson.
I don't know about Harry because he had that big injury at the start of the season, but Bobby Reed is like absolutely the case in point of being an in-betweenie, in my opinion. But there are just a few of those that you probably replace in the summer and you build on, and I don't think that's a bad thing. We have good building blocks in place here at the moment. Look at some of the signings we made this summer; they've been amazing. So I think there is positivity despite yesterday's result being shite.
Alex, when Dan was saying that he thinks that all but ends are Europe chances, I saw a little twinge in your face. Do you disagree?
I do disagree. I think momentum-wise, we're not in a good space at the moment, but you've got to look at the games that we have coming up. The next 3 are West Ham, Everton and Leeds. 2 of those being at home in West Ham and in Leeds, and then we've got to go to the Goodison. I think if Fulham can get back on the right track and they can play like we saw them play for 70 minutes a couple of weeks ago at Old Trafford, we could get 9 points out of that. That would put us up near towards the European places again. I know things aren't looking too good with the way that, we've not won a game since mid-February. Form isn't looking good. The players are looking tired, but I think that it's not the be all and end all just because we lost away at Bournemouth. I think that there's still a lot of games left, and the fact we're only 4 points off the European places, we're 4 points away from Liverpool and from Brighton and from Brentford. Like, they're not out of reach just yet. Even if we were to drop below Chelsea, they're still not out of reach. So I think there's a long way to go, and even though it's looking unlikely at the moment that Europe, it'd be a nice achievement to have. I mean, if you'd said at the beginning of the season that we'd be in 10th, I'd be like, no, what are you talking about? That's not going to happen. To still finish in the top half of the table, if that were to happen by the end of May, I'd still be happy with that, regardless of whether or not we got Europe. But I don't think that Europe is unachievable. I think it's a little bit of a stretch with the way that things are at the moment in regards to form and the fact that our squad depth isn't as deep as we'd like it to be. But I think it's not unachievable.
Level-headed optimism. That's why we get you on, Alex. Yeah, fantastic stuff. Yeah. Talking about the in-betweenies, Jarms. That's a phrase that I'm coining, or you're coining, I should say. I thought the substitutes were very interesting yesterday. It seemed that Marco Silva just adopted a Hail Mary approach, just get as many people on and just try as many things. Like, I'm sorry, but I think the Dan James experiment is all but done now. I'm baffled as to what he brings to this side as an option coming off the bench. You've raised your eyebrows there. Do you disagree?
I don't disagree at all, actually. And I was nodding along with you and saying, mate, yeah, I agree, but I realised I was on mute. But yeah, I think for me, the Dan James experiment in my own head stopped at the Manchester United at home game, because he came on then and he was not great. I mean, if you've watched the white, no, I don't think he did. Oh, he did. He did score.
I think it was another home game in that run of fixtures. I can't remember who it was, but he was woeful.
He was not good against United at all, and for me that was the point where it just like the rope gave out and I couldn't support him anymore. It sounds horrible to say this. He's a professional footballer. He's light years ahead of where I will ever be on a football pitch. But I do think,
as if that needed to be pointed out.
I always feel like I have to say it, because you always get these people that are like, you couldn't fucking play, could you? So just to clarify, I cannot play football. But yeah, I feel like the subs yesterday were a little bit here and there. I think Tom Kenny's cameo, as I said earlier, was brilliant. I loved every second of that. It was great. How Dan James made it on the pitch before Harry Wilson. Again, I'm not sure how that managed to happen. Cedric coming on for the last couple of minutes and then just not doing a hell of a lot was also bizarre. I saw a tweet that I really, really loved. It was like, the right side of Dan James and Cedric should be a hate crime, which I laughed at for a long time. I can't remember who tweeted it, but it made me laugh for miles. But yeah, I think Silva there is some criticism that can be leveled at him, and I think subs maybe one. They're always a little too late, and they don't always seem to make sense. But sometimes you got to zig when you have to zag.
Yeah, I think this is the thing. Like, he is limited in the changes he can make, but I am just anti in general managers choosing this path to try and get a goal in a game, which is just put on all of the attacking players that you have on the bench, because often, and then we saw it, but we didn't have any obvious way that we were trying to score a goal. I think we had 4 wingers on the pitch, and I don't know what that's going to do, what that's going to achieve, because we had a midfield 2 of Tom Cairney and Sasha Lukic, who were tasked with the whole thing of getting the ball from our centre-backs and then getting the ball to one of these players among 11 Bournemouth bodies. And I think you can't just sacrifice the entirety of midfield in that situation to just try and score a goal, because you need someone in there linking it all up. And it's something that we used to bemoan Scott Parker for doing, and I think Marco Silva does it every now and then as well, which is just try and lob on as many attackers as possible. Like, we've seen it in the past, he'll go 3 at the back and we'll have Harry Wilson as a right wing back sort of thing. And I'm not a massive fan of it, because I think you still need some level of structure and some way of creating, whereas it just seemed like we had three players on either wing who were trying to cross the ball into Carlos Vinicius. And maybe that's because we didn't have any other way of changing the game, because you can't bring on another striker because we don't have one. But I would have liked something different in that game, and also maybe sensing that the game was slipping away from us earlier, as Jarm says, and trying to impact that game earlier. And, you know, maybe Tom Cairney does come on and try and just calm things down. But yeah, it's I guess we would be having a go at him if he didn't throw on Harry Wilson at some point as well. So I guess there's two ways of looking at it.
I want to ask all of you this question. So there's been a lot of talk at the moment how Fulham have been overachieving in terms of the metrics, the stats, the expected goals. There was a brilliant video on Tifo that I'm sure people have seen. If you've not, I suggest you watch it because it's great. It really crunches the numbers and explains the areas in which Fulham have been overachieving. And I guess what I'm trying to ask is, do you think that this is starting to catch up with us now and everything's going to start to level out and we're going to see really a true representation of where this side should be within the division? Alex, I'll start with you.
Maybe not this season. I think we place ourselves quite high up, and I don't think even if we were to plateau now, that the teams who are below us probably won't catch us. We might see it happen into next season if we don't see many changes and we see a team that hasn't been built on. But I think for now, because we started off so well, everything's going to look hyperinflated. As much as I think that Europe isn't unachievable for us, we have to also be aware that when we came into the season, that a lot of us, me included, had very low expectations. So I'm happy where we are. If it makes it look like that we're ahead of where we should be, fine, then I don't mind. I think we probably are ahead of where we should be, but with the way that the bottom half of the table is looking at the moment, I'm happy with that. But I think that we'll go into next season, and I think that if things stay as they are, will be a truer representation of what the stats say.
Dan, anything to add?
I agree with Alex. I think this was going to happen at some point. I think there were times when we were riding our luck, and we were also, you know, especially this half of the season. You think Manor Solomon digging us out of games with worldies was actually, at the time, felt great. We were like, this is fantastic. We've got an absolute star on our hands, and we're winning or drawing games from a position where we've not played particularly well. But these things do tend to come back and bite you. And maybe that's a good thing, because this actually now is like there's a cold truth to this of like, right, okay, we were previously getting through some games and winning despite maybe not deserving to. And now we're losing games that we definitely didn't deserve to win. And that's, I think, a point where we have to like reset and like, maybe we need to change things up, because you do ride your luck and it does run out. Like, I think expected stats in general get a lot of stick from people who don't like them, but they do work and they are pretty true to form. And if you span them out over like a long period of time, people follow that projection. And so if we're putting up numbers of a team that shouldn't be 8th, 9th, 10th in the league, it's likely that we will slowly start to slip towards where we are expected to be based on how we play.
Yeah, I think I agree with you there. Anything to add, Jarms? I think Dan and Alex covered it pretty well there. I've like literally got nothing more.
Just one top up is watch the latest episode of The Whiteboard. That's the only thing I'm going to say.
To get your supplements, yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Just a quick word on the vitality, Dan. It was a ground that I ticked off yesterday. Despite the result, I thought, lovely little ground.
Great vibes.
Yeah, good vibes. Really good view of the pitch. I like having an away end which is side on. That's a nice touch, I thought. And cheap beers as well. I got a round of 3 beers with my dad and my brother. It was like 12 quid. I was like, could get used to this.
It's not bad.
Wow.
I know. I was saying on the walk to the ground with my dad, this is the ground that always gets brought up in these discussions of like soulless bowls that are stuck on industrial estates, but give me the vitality over the Medeski every single day of the week. Like, you know, like I think there's grounds like the Vitality get stick for being old and a bit rickety and, you know, it's small and it's congested, but there's so much more in that and more atmosphere and more fun in those sort of grounds than these sort of identikit stadiums going up. So yeah, nice little club, nice little ground.
Fairy tale little club. Anyway, that'll do for part 1. Don't go anywhere because we will be back with some of your questions. Welcome back to the Fulhamish podcast. I am George Cooper and I'm joined by Dan, Alex Irons and Ben Jarman. How are we all, gents?
Good,
Yeah,
thanks,
good,
Coops.
thank you.
Lovely. Right, I'm going to start with a question from Dan Cooke. He says, I'm aware I'm on the podcast, but can we speak about why we have no obvious plans on how to score goals other than lumping balls into the box ad infinitum? Dan, I'm going to throw this one to you. What do you reckon?
Answer your own question, mate.
You deal with that. I was looking for a sort of a hive mind to this because it's weird because one thing we've never struggled with under Marco Silva is like creating chances and scoring goals, but we do seem to have a real issue, especially when we go behind in games. So I don't know if we have a real plan on how we're going to get back into them. You know, even at 1-1 yesterday, I'd still say that, you know, we were searching for a goal. We wanted to score, but we didn't look like scoring. And I think the same happened against Brentford. The same happened against Brighton, even though we won. These are games where we just don't seem to be able to unpick defences anymore. And you mentioned it, Coops, at the start, that teams do start to adjust in the Premier League. And if they know what you're about and they know how you cause them problems, you get found out pretty quickly and teams know how to deal with it. You know, we've seen it in games where teams will defend really wide against us because they know we cause problems with our width, with our overlapping fullbacks, with our wingers, and they've shut us down. You know, Brentford did it brilliantly. But it feels like we don't have any sort of plan on how to score other than crossing the ball into the box. And the one time we did it yesterday where we formed a move that resulted in something more than a cross from deep, we scored and we picked them apart nicely. I know you're not going to do that 10 times a game because there's a whole level of guile that comes with it. You know, you need to pick the right pass at the right time to the right runner. But I just would like to see something else from this Fulham team because we've just gone a bit stale when we try and create chances. And we spoke about it on the whiteboard, but our XG this half of the season has gone off a cliff. I think it's dropped from 1.39 expected goals per game in 2022 to 0.97 in 2023. And that's quite a big drop. You know, you're looking at 0.4 XG, you know, in terms of a difference. That's quite big, and that clearly we are struggling to create chances.
Yeah, I think so much of that style of play that Marco's develops is reliant on having an informed Alexander Mitrovic, because you know you've got a striker of that caliber, and then if he drops form, gets suspended, whatever, then I find like we're sometimes scrabbling around for plan B, unless you, as you said, have a Manor Solomon cut inside worldie, which he so nearly. Did you see the cut inside yesterday? Everyone was like, "Oh yes, it's happening," but didn't quite pay off. Yeah, Jarms, do you agree with what Dan says in terms of just a lack of creativity other than sort of balls in from the wide areas?
Agree, and kind of want to build on it. I think there's definitely an issue with squad depth, as we spoke about earlier in the pod. You know, you have one focal point in this midfield, and it's Andreas Pereira, and as soon as he hits, you know, anywhere near being out of form, that's when everything around him sort of falls to pieces. You know, the house of cards comes tumbling down, and you have to have a replacement in there. I think, you know, if you want to look at the whiteboard now, we can kind of give you a bit of a sneak preview, in that Andreas Pereira's stats underlying just aren't very good outside of dead balls. He doesn't create or complete enough passes per 90 to really have an influence on the game. He's not that progressive where he receives the ball. And as I said, other than set pieces, he's oftentimes, you know, on the periphery of games, not really having that, you know, the clutch or the control in the game that you'd like your number 10 to have. I think that becomes an issue. I think that fullback wise, you know, you have the speed of Anthony Robinson, but you don't necessarily have the delivery. On the other side, you have the delivery, but you don't have the speed. So, you know, the Premier League is a very fast-paced league. You have to be able to get in behind. You have to be fast on your feet. I don't necessarily think that we have that. So I think that there are certain areas where we're so telegraphed in the build-up that we need a little bit of impetus and spark, and you know, maybe someone just to risk a few more things, because we certainly don't have that now. And you know, when you lack an elite goal scorer because he's out of form or suspended, in the way that we, you know, missing Alexander Mitrovic for the next 3 games at the very least, you know, you're relying on someone to pull something out of the bag, or for someone to step up, and I just don't see that being Vinicius.
Can I just add to that as well with what you said about Andreas Pereira? And he scored for us, which was great. That he got into the position that you want an attacking number 10 to get into. And I think if we cycle it back to last season, you look at Fabio Carvalho, and granted, all of this stuff is championship based, but Fabio scored 10 goals last season from a relatively similar position, not identical, but we'll call it a number 10. Harry Wilson scored 10 goals from out wide. And Andreas has got 3 this season. And our wingers are at similar levels to around that. We've got wingers picking up 2 or 3 goals. We just don't seem to have enough outside of Alexander Mitrovic, I think. And I do think that it's a positive sign from Andreas that he got on the score sheet again, because it's been a while, but we do need goal impact from him. He needs to be scoring or creating, because he's such a focal point of this team.
I was just wondering, Jarms, can you dig a bit deeper into his stats, because he's without doubt our most assists, our highest output for assists, right?
Yeah,
and 3, you would argue 3 goals at this stage of the season for a number 10, fairly modest. I mean, not dreadful. He is scoring, but I think he's been incredibly impactful for Fulham this season. But I'm just trying to struggle how he can, be pulling in assists and scoring the odd goal, and yet still not have the stats to back it up. How does that work?
Well, Dan can work with me on this one, but a lot of the assists he does get are from dead ball situations, likes of corners, free kicks. So, I think there's been a couple of times where he's popped the corner in and we've scored it from the edge of the box, which is absolutely ridiculous. I think one of his assists was to Manuel Solomon, where it was a 2-yard pass laterally, and then Solomon curled it in from the edge of the box. Again, not something that you would class as a typical assist from a number 10. But then looking at some of the other numbers as well, his attempted passes per 90 are around 35, correct, Dan? Which is in the lower half of the sample size for the whole of the Premier League. He has he receives 4 progressive passes per 90 minutes, which is in the 9th percentile of the Premier League. Again, this is not a great stat to have whatsoever. And what that means is that he just doesn't break the lines. He's often very static or receives the ball in areas of low threat. It also means that at times he can be on the periphery of games, not receiving the ball or not giving the ball enough. It also means that his dribble stats are also very low, which means that he doesn't take players on that regularly, and he doesn't carry the ball out of areas of danger into areas where, again, we can start to counter on the transition. I think what this boils down to is, you'll remember when we started the season, we were a very transition heavy side. We were catching teams on the counter. You would see the ball go into Mitrovic and then back to Pereira, and then you would see the wingers go in behind Mitrovic and then have a cutback, and we'd likely score or create at least a high value chance. That doesn't happen anymore. We now are starting to play in front of teams, very telegraphed, cycling the ball around lots, but not doing too much with it. And I think that's because, 1, he might not have the space to operate that much anymore, but 2, he's not actively going out to seek the ball as much as he used to.
Yeah, I think that's spot on from Jarms. I think that the underlying stuff around it, Coops, is that he just isn't involved in games very much. And this is, it's a criticism in a part, but obviously there is an appreciation from us as well, because he has got the most assists for us this season, and his set pieces have been huge. He's created the 3rd highest number of chances in the league this season from set pieces. James Ward-Prowse, Kieran Trippier are the only 2 players who've done better from set pieces, and they are exceptional set piece takers. So that deserves a lot of credit. But I just think there's something that in times in games, and we saw it yesterday, where he just drifts out of it. And it happens with number 10s a lot. And I think that's one of the reasons why number 10s have slightly gone out of fashion, is because they have a tendency to drift out of games and they struggle to impact it if they're closed off properly. But I'd just like to see him do more in terms of getting on the ball, trying to make things happen. And we've spoken about Tom Kearney, but he's great at that. We'll have all seen it yesterday. When Tom Kearney came on the pitch, the first thing he wants to do all the time is someone give him the ball, and he'll go and search for it. And I just don't feel Andreas Pereira does the same thing.
I mean, it'll be interesting to see what Marco does in the coming games, West Ham fixture, whether he does decide to mix it up. I think a lot of the fans would be quite happy to see TC start, and I guess we'll see. But for more insight, do check out the whiteboard. I'm worried that you've already sort of given away a large chunk of it, but no, they're excellent. So do check them out. Alex, we've got a question now from Matt Wall, who says momentum this year is important for talent attraction / retention for next season, as well as form into next season. Wolves finished last year as we've seen set to, and we're in the relegation zone, for most of the season. How do we avoid falling into the same trap? What do you reckon?
I think that essentially we need to pick up form to go into the rest of the season on a high. I think that maybe finishing in a European place might make Fulham an attractive club for some players, but I don't think it will be the be-all and end-all. I think that potential players will look at the club as overall and where the club stands and go, if they're interested and they want to come in, then they will. I think the fact that we came into the Premier League this season and we were able to bring in the likes of Palhinha and Pereira and Willian kind of shows where Fulham are sitting already. They're a club that people are aware of, and I think that going into next season, I think we'll see similar caliber players come in. That you'll get some that have maybe gone under the radar, like Palhinha and Pereira, and maybe one like Willian, who has been in England for a while and is one that maybe people potentially don't rate anymore, but he's still got a lot of potential and a lot to prove. We may see someone like that come in again. I think that Fulham should be okay in the summer in regards to bringing in players. I just feel that maybe people are looking potentially a little bit too deep into how other clubs have done and using Wolves as a comparison, maybe because of the Portuguese factor as well. I think that Fulham going forward into next season, providing that we bring in the right players, I think we should be fine. I don't think we're going to see a league as close as we saw it this year going into next season. That this, for some reason, seems to be like a bit of a one-off.
Yeah, I do. I think there is a little bit in it. There is that classic cliche of second season syndrome that comes in, and Wolves, whilst that's not second season syndrome, but it's in that similar way of like a really positive season from a team that is performing above expectations. And the team I'm thinking of as well is Sheffield United, who when they came up under Wilder were exceptional in their first season, and then second season got relegated. And I'm not saying I think that will happen with us. I think we understand that, we can't remain stationary this summer. We do need to be on the move. But Wolves attempted that over the summer. Wolves spent quite a lot of money, and they did, in theory, strengthen their squad and improve on their depth, and it just hasn't worked. So it seems so obvious to say it, but it is important that Fulham get it right, that you're not just signing players, but you're signing the right players. And that's a big thing, because you're not going to hit not every transfer is going to be a hit, but Wolves had a lot of misses this summer, and that has cost them big time. Look at Gonzalo Guedes, who came in at 30 odd million pounds and come January was shipped out on loan. Like, those are the mistakes that Fulham can't be making.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a fascinating summer. I've been quite vocal saying that I tend not to indulge in transfer rumours, but I think I may scratch that itch over the course of the summer, because it's like not only who we're going to be bringing in, but just I'm going to be looking to see who Palhinha has been linked with obsessively until next season starts, because it's a constant fear. Anyway, Mark,
I wouldn't be surprised if I have a suspicion that we'll break our transfer record this summer.
You think?
I think we'll probably splash on at least one, and I don't think that'll be our only spending, but I think with the way that it looks with financial fair play, in theory, based on now we're getting off the 18-19 stuff off our accounts, it should free up quite a lot of FFP space. And I wonder if this is a season when we see a big splurge and one of those players being for a hefty sum of money, which is exciting as long as it works.
The thing about the Khans as well is that they're not shy to pay people and to spend money. We saw it with the Jags last year. They were the biggest spenders in free agency in the NFL, and we've seen it with Fulham. They consistently back us. So I wouldn't be surprised if as Dan says, we go and break a lot of records next year.
Yeah. We'll see. Have Fulham ever had a successful record transfer? I don't think we have we? If we look back over I think Brian Ruiz was, and then I thought it was he not? Oh, Andre Frank Zambo-Anguissa, he wasn't he?
He was a record.
Records, and that obviously didn't work out.
Didn't work out, but he is also so good at football. He's so good at football. It hurts to see how good he is.
Player.
Yeah.
Sorry, Ruiz, I thought he said he was a good footballer and then he wasn't because he wouldn't play for us in the Championship. But sorry, that's my bad.
I thought he was our record signing. But my point is that
I think
Fulham don't do well with record signings. So hopefully we can change that this summer. Can you think of anything over the years? I can't think who it would have been prior to Ruiz, but
Steve Marley,
yeah. Well, again, not good.
Andy Johnson as well. I think he was.
I mean, injury problems, but he was a good player for us. Anyway, move on. M says, "Is it time to retire the mint kit, Jarms?"
Absolutely.
We touched upon that earlier. Yeah, get rid. Never play in that kit again. Mark has asked, "Has our bubble burst? We didn't have variation in that second half to change things. Striker and midfielder shortage, I think. The Kavanagh factor, that's the point I want to focus on. Alex, do you think that we had some kind of... I was hoping that we'd come out of the blocks of this game and try and put the Manchester United game behind us, but do you think all of this looming suspension and all of that kind of stuff has had an effect on the squad and we're just a bit flat and dejected after that?
Well, because looking at the first half, no, not at all. The fact that Fulham could have gone into the end of the first half 2-0 up if Robertson's effort hadn't struck the top of the crossbar. I think it was just more the fact that we just got outplayed on the day. Like in the second half, especially Tavernier coming back off from injury, really kind of changed the game for Bournemouth into their favour. I think that although there's always going to be speculation around the club and in the media, especially with what was happening over the past couple of weeks, which has been blown massively out of proportion. But I think the players and the coaching staff would be professional enough to deal with it. I think that going into the Bournemouth game, they would have been prepared for that and only that. Like they're not worrying about what's happening. They shouldn't be worrying about what's happening on the outside. We know that there's going to be a ban for Mitrovic. Willian should be back within a couple of games, and there's going to be a potential ban for Silva. We know that's going to happen. There's nothing that the players can do about it. All they can really change is what the results are happening what the results are going to be on the pitch. And I think that's really what they should be focusing on, and probably what they are focusing on more than what's happening, all the noise that's happening outside.
Fair enough. Yeah, speaking of Kavanagh, we've got West Ham coming up next, and the team will be hoping to repay the injustice of what was West Ham away earlier this year. Who was reffing that day?
Chris Kavanagh.
Can I just say as well that he had another absolute mare, Chris Kavanagh, yesterday, refereeing the Nottingham Forest Wolves game. By all accounts, he lost complete control of the game again. He sent off an assistant manager from both sides. I was saying it to my dad, but a referee who thinks dealing with situations by branding red cards left, right and centre is the right way to keep control of the game is just not a good referee, because that's not how you keep a game in check. If anything, I think you just spark more by just whipping red cards out left, right and centre. So I think he is probably someone we might not see very much of as a referee for the foreseeable, because he ballsed it up again yesterday, and I think he's probably going to be slipping down to the Championship for a bit.
Good riddance.
Yeah.
On to West Ham. Jarms, how do you think Fulham are going to fare? I'm looking at this thinking this is a game that we should win, but then it's tough. They're scrapping for their lives. They got a win against Southampton this weekend. I mean, what do you reckon?
Again, a tough game. West Ham in a fairly decent run of form. They picked up 3 points this weekend as well. I think they're probably a bit of a better team than their position in the table would suggest. I think they've been quite unlucky at times with some of the games, and then other times absolute dross. But that's what happens when you're down the bottom of the league. And I think one of the most satisfying things here is to see West Ham this far down the league, knowing that they were probably the biggest spenders in Europe over the summer, which is again quite a fun stat to have. Obviously, aside Chelsea, but I think that, as I said, they're a lot better than their table position suggests, and they have a lot of weapons that can hurt us. The likes of Ben Rama can hurt us. Mikel Antonio is out there. They have a a fairly good centre-half partnership on their day. And I think that Fulham do need to be at an intensity level which is much higher than we saw yesterday, and have a little bit more structure than we have seen in the last few games. I think if there's anything that can get the ball rolling here to get this season to a point where we're not just petering out, it's winning a London derby. So we need to throw our weight behind that and try and get 3 points off the Hammers. I mean, as a guy that's originally from Essex, there's nothing better than seeing West Ham fans being beaten. So I'd love to see that.
Alex, do you expect to see Marco mix things up a little bit, or do you think it will be much of the same?
I'd like to think so. I'd like to think, as we mentioned earlier, that he'd potentially start Kenny in there. I think that as well as good as a player that Bobby De Cordova-Reid has been for us, maybe he needs a bit of a rest coming off and putting someone else at right wing. I think things will be switched up. I think they are, because like we've been saying, that it has felt like a bit stale. It feels like every single fixture we have, when we look at the lineup, it's deja vu all over again. We know what to expect. It would be good to see things freshened up, and if it works, then fantastic. But if it doesn't work, I don't think we're in a situation where we really need to worry about our league place. So I potentially Silver may feel he's got a bit more freedom here, because although European football is still on the line, at least for some of us who are optimistic, it wouldn't hurt to fresh things up. And if we do go down to a defeat for West Ham, then that's just the way it is. I mean, we're technically mathematically safe. I know 40 is the benchmark, but we've been sitting just below that for what feels like an age. But I think that, yeah, he's going to have to freshen things up. Maybe bring in Suarez over for Kene Tete, who again has been fantastic, but could do with a bit of a rest. Maybe we see Tosin come in for Diop or for Ream. And maybe one of the youngsters come in, like Luke Harris or Tyrese Francois comes in, and we give them a bit of a run around against West Ham, but we'll wait and see. But I would like to see him make a couple of changes. Yeah,
we'll wait and see. Fulham face West Ham, next game at the Cottage, hoping to, return to winning ways. As I say, it's before defeats on the bounce now. The squad could really do with a bit of a boost. But that'll do for today's podcast, I think. Thanks for joining me, lads. It gets it all out of your system, doesn't it, breaking it down? So, thank you very much, Alex.
No, my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dan.
Thank you very much, Coops.
Thank you very much, Jarms.
Thank you very much. Lovely to be back on.
Yeah, only thing left to do is to name the pod. So what are we going to go for, Dan?
I think I'll have to go for Cottage Analytica, Chris Frank, friend of the pod, with Cherries on top.
Very good. Thursday Club will be back this week, and also check out the whiteboard with Dan and Jarms. There's lots of great analysis there. Yeah, have a great week. We'll see you soon. Win you whites.
Toodles.